get started maybe by talking about what is burnout? What does it exactly mean? As I mentioned earlier, the World Health Organization has called it an occupational phenomenon. But can you help us explain burnout in your language, please?
Yeah, of course. And I think I wanted to thank the team that has put this on too, by the way, Michael, and they've done a fantastic job. So thank you to
Great.
Impact for having me today.
Thanks.
So let's
Yes.
talk about burnout, which is something that a lot of people are suffering with right now. And as you mentioned, WHO had given the definition back in 2019 when it became a legit medical diagnosis, if you will. And what they did say is that it was unmanaged workplace stress. Now, if I asked anybody in general to describe what they were feeling in terms of burnout, I don't know that they would necessarily describe it as a workplace stress that was unmanaged. I think that there would be more of a different type of response. Now, this has been studied for decades, Michael, and so the founder, or one of the fathers of burnout, is Herbert Federberger, and he said that there were really three components, and I think this is where people are going to actually relate more to what burnout is all about. So the first component that he talks about is emotional exhaustion. This is just giving so much for too long, so you start to feel that depletion. The second thing that he talks about is the depersonalization, really the depletion of empathy and compassion, which I think we've just, again, been putting out there for so long consistently, especially during COVID. And the third thing he talks about is the decreased sense of accomplishment. It feels like we're working so hard towards so many goals that we might not be making the progress that we desire. And so these three things that typically happen at work also are happening in a home. And so I think it's not just a workplace situational component anymore. It goes beyond that. For me, Michael, in terms of describing burnout in the simplest terms, is that it's our body's way of telling us that our capacity is depleted. And we're going to talk a lot more about some of those symptoms and what that looks like. But I also want to draw an attention to time versus capacity, because just because you might have the time doesn't mean you have the capacity. And we're going to talk about how our capacity is eroded by distraction and things that really take away from our ability to focus, to get things done in our day that were once easier that are now extremely difficult. So burnout also doesn't discriminate. We will see it in multiple levels of an organization. We will see it in both genders. We will see it across all of the generations. And I will say the millennials, and I'm going to warn the audience not to roll their eyes because there's a lot of bad rap around millennials and spoiled.
I'm not a millennial. You won't offend me, I promise you.
Right. Okay. Good. I'm glad you clarified that for us. But the millennials are experiencing a high rate of burnout, and that is because of the way that they have grown up in terms of entering adulthood and the way that the expectations have been set for them. So there's a lot of stories out there in terms of what burnout looks like, but everybody's story is different, and I want everybody to recognize that.
So now that we're into the pandemic, like you've sort of set the stage with millennials, but now that we're into the pandemic, I think I might know the answer to this question, but is that making it any better or worse?
Oh my gosh. I think there's a lot of things here that are creating some circumstances that are worsening the situation. I'm going to talk about a few different things here in terms of what's making it worse. Let's talk about, wellness for a second. Wellness at this point has become this goal that everybody is striving to achieve. And I think there's just this extra added pressure of wellness and how that's being defined that's really not helping people actually. I would say the second thing is this lack of boundaries. We've heard about this. A lot of people have talked about this. I mean, our boundaries have really been depleted because the boundaries, as we once knew them, which were commuting, going to the gym, organized sports, socializing, these things have just dissipated into thin air, and we haven't been able to uphold those. So I think those things really are hindering us and adding. I think the fear of getting sick, the fear of getting this COVID, I think is really an extra pressure that is adding. Another one that's been talked about a lot is the mental load. the second shift, if you will. And it's been researched and really traditionally around, it's showing up more in women. So women have a little bit more of this mental load to carry now because there's this emotional bonding that they have to do. There's flowers to deliver. There's people to take care of. There's Zoom parties to, to answer to. There's household chores. So I think there's a lot.
Childcare responsibilities, I presume.
There's a lot more.
On top of that.
Exactly. And so I think, there's probably some excessive head nodding as I go through this because, it's just, there's an added. I would also say excessive screen time, lack of connection and collaboration, and finally, just this general uncertainty of, are we going to return back to normal, and what is that normal going to look like? And so that has exacerbated the burnout issue.
Right. So we have the issue. Are there any barriers that prevent people from seeking or accessing help to combat these symptoms?
Definitely, there are definitely barriers that I want to talk about. I think one of the biggest under-leveraged mitigation strategies to avoid burnout is self-awareness. I think our self-awareness has been eroded by distraction, and we start to become indifferent to our indifferences. I think really just kind of going along with the flow. And there's something I actually want to talk about right now, which is called languishing. Right. And languishing is really the middle ground between flourishing and burnout. And that's where we start to see people just hit these barriers because they're caught in the middle and they can't move forward, and we start to see people languish. And so that's something that has really impacted as one of the barriers for sure. I would say not knowing how to have the conversation about how you're feeling, Michael, would be another barrier in terms of how do you approach your manager? How do you approach someone close to you to say that you're struggling without feeling like, well, they're struggling. Should I be struggling? Am I allowed to struggle? Is my struggle worse, better? I think there's just a lot of just, mystique around this in terms of how do we define what that looks like. Fear of really admitting that you're struggling is difficult because what if your boss thinks you can't do your job properly? What if there's just shame and vulnerability potentially around that too?
Right.
Really not having that language. And the other part too, which really became clear in the beginning, was this ambiguous loss. How do we talk about something that we can't actually articulate? Right? The ambiguous loss of something that we couldn't really put our finger on, the loss of that social connection, the loss of what it is that we used to do. So I think that's really infiltrated. And Michael, the third barrier is really about completing the stress response cycle. This is huge. And what happens is that 25% of us deal with anxiety at any given time, but we need anxiety. Anxiety actually produces the adrenaline that gets us through to train for a 5-kilometer run or a 10-kilometer run, or even getting a promotion, right? But when we don't complete the stress response cycle, this becomes a barrier because it has a compounding effect. And so do you want me to elaborate a little bit more on what that looks like?
Well, yeah, I think I would, because in my mind, there's a bit of, I think you're talking about languishing, and it's a middle ground here. Like, is it depression, or what? It sounds like it's on a part of a mental health continuum, but it's where does it lie in that in that context? Because I don't know that it's actual depression, but it's not feeling a good sense of wellness either. So I get the sense that it's sort of in the mushy middle somewhere there. Is that fair, or?
You're 100% right. It definitely is in the middle. Again, it's in the middle of when we flourish, and it's in the middle of when we're actually in depletion and we're in burnout. So it's this middle zone where we just don't know how to articulate necessarily how we're feeling, but our motivation is lacking. The sense of connection is lacking, and so it's like we're trying to get somewhere, trying to get nowhere fast. Really is what that feels like. So it's kind of like walking around in circles. And I think, again, if I relate that languishing to completing that stress response cycle, the biggest thing we can do is move our body. Let me explain. There's a great book out there called Burnout, and it was recently published by two PhD sisters, and they talk about the stress response cycle. And basically, tax season, right, was a couple of weeks ago, and I think, the end of the season, and I think people were pretty stressed. What happens in our body is that our brain doesn't, or our body doesn't know that it's tax season. So our body has to tell our brain, celebrate that you actually got your taxes in, do something, jump up and down, move, and then your brain knows that your body is a safe place to live. It's quite simple. And the thing is that we've refuted simplicity because we want quick fixes. And can't wait to talk about that, I think, a little later on in terms of the anxiety economy that has caught on because of all of this.
And again, just in terms of the mental health expressions that we show, like how do we exhibit when we're in this state? What do we show?
There are so many symptoms that exist, and they differ. They differ across. Irritability is one of them. Lack of executive functioning, where we just can't do that simple math where we once were able to do. Exhaustion, consistently and constantly, I think is another big one. But I will tell you a quick story about my own experience with burnout, because I think it's important to know and to recognize. I talked about self-awareness as being a barrier, and if we can address that, that is half the battle, being self-aware of our commitment habits. And so personally, I experienced burnout, but I was in denial because no one wants to admit that they're burnt out. I think it feels like a sign of weakness when it really isn't. And so I was experiencing things like hair loss, skin issues, cellulitis, migraines, laryngitis, nosebleeds spontaneously. And so
real physical symptoms, actually.
Yes, real physical symptoms where I would run to the doctors and say, like, what's going on? Finally, the doctor says, I'm writing you off for 1 month. And I was like, whoa. She said, you are burnt out. And so in my true high adrenaline, like had the high work for, high propensity for work and high achieving, I said, wait a minute, can we negotiate this? Like, can we just maybe 1 week? And, at that point, we had a bit of an interesting discussion. And so I did take a bit of time off, not a month, but I did take some time off to recover. So to answer your question, symptoms will show up differently for different people. Being aware of some of these cyclical patterns, being aware of some of these elements is really important.
Okay. I think now is the time. Carrie, were we going to do a poll at this time? I hope somebody's looking after the technology, but we did want to do a poll of everybody who's in the audience. And the poll really relates to this kind of candid discussion that we're having about burnout and what the experience has looked like for some of us. It probably hits home for those of you who've been feeling burnt out. So like you, if you can, push the right button. The question is, how many times in the last year have you experienced feelings of burnout? And you can see you've got 4 choices ranging from 0 to 4+. So I'd appreciate if everybody would do that, fill that in, and we'll come back, Melanie, and see what the poll has to say.
Sounds great. I think, this poll, which I often put up in my talks, becomes quite revealing. And it's, a lot of times it's no surprise where the results end up, but it's important to recognize these results. I was with a bunch of lawyers, Michael, I think you'd appreciate this, last June, and I was doing a series of talks for them, and this question came up. And this legal and lawyers in that industry are one of the most, the highest burnout groups that we will see.
Oh, come on, no, that can't be true. That can't be true.
No, it doesn't apply to you.
Well, no, I get it. Yes.
Yeah. It is a frenetic pace. It is the nature of the job. But what we see, and it's funny because, I'm not surprised, right?
All right, so we do have the poll results. By the way, these are not lawyers, unless the few lawyers in MPAC have filled this out. But what I see that we've got the boy, oh boy, I can't add very much, but it looks like, are we close to 80+% from 2 to 3 and almost 50, almost at 4+? Does this shock you?
Sadly, it does not shock me. It doesn't, but it is a reality, and I think MPAC is doing things. I'm really pleased and encouraged to see that MPAC is actually putting different ideas in place to help their employees, to support their employees, which is really good. I mean, this is not something we're going to change overnight. This is something that collectively we have to just hold hands and really attack this in a strategic way, in a supportive way, because we are talking about mental health. So I want to thank everybody for participating in that poll, and obviously it's anonymous, but it does paint a bit of a picture of where people are right now, and meeting people where they are is really important. So just back to the lawyers where they had answered. I have a lawyer.
You have to come back to the lawyers. Okay. Yeah.
I have to, right? But just quickly, it takes a month on average to recover from a diagnosis of burnout. That's, more clinical. And so a lot of people, especially my one friend, he is a lawyer, and he said, Mel, I've been diagnosed with 3 bouts of burnout, and currently I'm on my 2nd attempt to recover from my first diagnosis. And so it just goes to show that, it's so prevalent and not really well addressed and cared for. And so we really need to bring that to the forefront and reduce that stigma, because look, physical health challenges are normalized while mental ones are stigmatized. And I think we need to have more of those conversations.
Right. So having talked about it and having talked about the problems, maybe now we can start talking about how we address these problems. And you've created a number of, you've got a number of strategic tools in your toolkit. One of the things we invited people to do today in the invitation for the VLC is we asked everybody to take 5 minutes to complete what you call a capacity assessment. And for everybody in the audience, if you haven't done it already, if you visit Melanie's website, it's melaниesodka.com/capacity assessment. There it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can fill this out. A word from our sponsor. I want to stress that any information you provide or share and the results of this poll will be anonymous, will not be shared with MPAC, will not be shared with Melanie, will not be shared with anyone. So no problem in doing that. And that's the poll. And maybe, Melanie, while people are maybe looking for that, maybe you can tell us a bit about the capacity assessment and what it does it help us understand. And yeah, I did one too, so you can embarrass me with it too.
Absolutely. So yeah, we're going to talk about your results in just a second, Michael. But this capacity creator was really born out of a state of burnout. While I was diagnosed and written off, during my time of rest, I do what I do best, and I create. And I really wanted to be able to help myself, but I also knew that I wasn't the only one going through this. And so I thought, what can I create to help understand the landscape of burnout and the different degrees to which this impacts people, and how do we give tools to be able to give to people to help themselves, right? Not always just going home and resting or meditating and things like it's what can we do? And I think the best strategy is the first strategy is to assess and track our states of capacity. So within that within this tool, there are 4 states of capacity that I identified that you can find yourself in at any given time. Now, I wanted to remind everybody, this is not a personality styles test. This is not something where you are pigeonholed and you are constantly fatigued. This is something where you can cycle out of and really optimize your capacity, and that's what this tool was built for. So that matrix allows you to understand, because you can take this assessment as many times as you want to really look at.
Okay, I think we've just got the matrix on the board now too.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So you're going to see that that you're going to end up in certain degrees. You're going to have certain percentages where you might end up, but there's going to be one prominent state of capacity that you're going to find yourself in at any given time. And I would, wager that given the burnout poll that we just did, that we're going to see a lot of people really teetering between indulgent and fatigued. So why don't I take everybody through a very quick overview of the 4 states, and then Michael, I'd like you to reveal your result and we'll talk about that.
You're going to show them to me because I sent them to you. You're okay. Well, if you share it with me, I'll be honest.
Okay, sounds good. We're going to put Michael in the hot seat in just a minute. Okay, so there are two big factors here when we really consider what state of capacity we're in. We take a look at all of the opportunity, all of the options, all of the obligations that we're faced with every single day, and we also look at our bandwidth, which is also called capacity. Now, if I start with the first box, which is indulgent, I mean it's not really that difficult to get to at this point where you're thinking this is where a lot of people say yes. A lot of the time, their first instinct is to say yes. This is when we are addicted to that adrenaline, we are competitive, we are hungry, we just want to take advantage of everything we possibly can. If we are not careful, however, this is where we get into this dangerous territory and we will tip into fatigue. Fatigue is essentially burnout. This is where you find yourself like needing a reboot. This is where you are immobilized and you are basically benched for a period of time. You're just not able to function at your normal capacity. When we talk about reserved, which is the third state, this is where we have capacity, but we're not necessarily leveraging it. So this could be a time in your life or a time at work where you're just comfortable, you're sitting, you're not really getting involved as much, or you just have this reserved capacity that you're not leveraging. Maybe you don't know what to do, maybe you're just a bit shy, maybe you're a bit too comfortable. So that's a really interesting state that I love to study. Now, finally, the state that we want to spend the most time in is maximized. Maximized is when you are on fire, your yeses are aligned with your values, you're saying no without guilt, and you're really protecting that capacity to really accomplish what you set out to accomplish. So in a very quick nutshell, Michael, those are the 4 states.
Right. And?
And drum roll.
All right,
Michael,
what did I do?
Yeah,
I have a feeling where I'm going to end up, but why don't you share with me? Or
do the big reveal.
Is this, by the way, this is all what we lawyers call without prejudice, by the way, okay?
Right, exactly. Yeah, there are a few disclaimers in my contract. Okay,
Right.
Indulgent is where you ended up. Now, let's talk about, are you surprised?
Not at all, not at
Okay.
all.
All right.
From what you're describing, and we spoke about this, well,
Yes.
here we are. Carla called me last week. Michael, do you want to do this VLC today? Sure, Carla, why not? So yeah, that is my natural tendency to say yes. And the things you're explaining, I like the rush.
Yes.
I love the rush, being a lawyer. I like the adrenaline. I like the challenge. I feel guilty when I say no. I think we were talking about that. I've also stupidly taken on, in addition to working at MPAC, another volunteer assignment over the last number of years, where they said, could you sit on a committee because you got expertise? Okay, I'll help you. Well, now can you sit on another committee? Oh, okay. Will you sit on the board? Will you sit on the executive? You think you might want to become president? I finally said no, like to some things. But when I said no,
Good.
yeah, no, but I felt guilt. So yeah, no, I think, so I think I'm there. And I was kidding you about, picking on lawyers, but lawyers are good to pick on because I think professionally we do have, some of those tendencies. And I can also tell you that private practice reinforces them in many ways. So
yes.
So
what you're saying, Michael, will probably resonate with a lot of people, especially when we finally do say that no. I mean, some people have an easier time of saying no than others. And I think those
it's not comfortable to say no sometimes.
It typically isn't comfortable. And I think, there's guilt in there, and the guilt is rooted in so many different things. I mean, this could come from a fear of missing out, FOMO. This could come from the fear of letting somebody down, just the natural people pleaser in certain folks. I think there's a lot of roots to that guilt or that shame in saying no. There's a wonderful TED Talk by Schwartz on the paradox of choice. choice. And he describes this process beautifully in terms of making a choice, but really we've programmed ourselves to feel bad before we make the choice, no matter what happens, because there's this fear of missing out, or there's just this guilt of did I make the right choice? What could I have done better? And so this comes back to the notion, Michael, of constant optimization, the pressure of constantly doing more, constantly moving forward, momentum, and really the loss of stillness, the loss of just, being able to protect our capacity and breathe, essentially, without being committed every second of the day. So indulgent, I mean, there are different degrees. Michael, you are not alone. There are, I think you're high functioning. You're high functioning.
Well, I was going to say, like, I would not have filled in the poll, if I can say that. I am being honest here. I do not personally feel burned out.
Right.
I feel very energized. In fact, now I do things other than all these other things. You have to find time to chill and just breathe, just as you're saying. But so I don't know, maybe intuitively, but
well,
I hope that doesn't undermine the theory here.
We talked about it.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit, you and I have talked about this in terms of even your routine around restorative health.
Yeah.
Restorative
a day a week, no work at all. Yeah.
Yes.
For sure. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, and I think some people might be thinking, oh, I can't afford to do that. And I think this is where we need to challenge ourselves and challenge our thinking and our mindset in terms of, if you're in need, this is something you have to do for yourself, because the alternative is not pretty. And again, just because you have time in your schedule doesn't mean you have the capacity. And so, that's really about understanding how much capacity do you have for certain categories in your life. So that's a really important piece.
So is this a good time to start talking about capacity and maybe bringing out our elastics, or where are we at?
I think it's a perfect time to do an activity. So I think everybody should grab their elastics right now. I'm going to take you through a capacity elasticity exercise.
Okay, I got it.
He's got it. He's ready to go. Okay.
Has everybody got it? I can't see everybody, but I'll assume everybody's doing this.
If they don't, I believe they'll be highly entertained by this exercise between you and I. Okay, so a couple of things. Michael, I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and you are going to say yes, regardless if you are inclined to or not.
Okay.
Again, I'm not going to hold you to any of these yeses or commitments. All right. And we're going to go along and we'll have it.
Without prejudice. Okay.
There it is. Exactly. Okay. So you're going to put this elastic between your two index fingers, just like Michael and I have. And I'm going to ask, everybody can participate. I'm going to ask Michael a series of questions. And every time he says yes, I'd like you to stretch that elastic every single time. So there's going to be some exercise involved. I'm not sure if you were all aware of that. Okay. Michael, are you ready to go?
Ready.
Okay.
Well, I got to just exercise my fingers a bit. Okay.
Let's do a little warm up, right? Yeah. Michael, can you lead the upcoming talk on burnout during the pandemic with Melanie?
Sure.
Perfect. Michael, can you actually just send us along some notes and thoughts? And maybe, actually, if you could just script out the way the session is going to go, that would be fantastic. Can you do that?
I'd love to help.
Okay, fantastic. And you know what? While we're talking about this, there is a spot on the Health and Wellness Committee. We need an extra body. Are you available to join us?
Well, if you think I can help, sure, why not?
You're the perfect person. We think you'd be amazing. Great. And actually, the vice president of that committee is actually going to be stepping down. So there's going to be an opportunity for you to take on a bigger role within this Health and Wellness Committee. I think you'd be great. What do you say, Michael?
If it's service and it contributes to the better cause, why not? Yeah, I'm happy to help out. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so it's another yes. Okay, and we're having a retirement party for Samira this weekend, and we'd love for you to attend on behalf of some of the employees. Can you make it?
She's such a great person. How could I not? Yes.
Okay, and you know what? While you're in that neck of the woods, do you mind helping me? I got this big old sofa that needs to come out of the basement, and I need an extra set of arms. Are you available to come and do that with me?
You're such a nice person. I'd love to help you.
All right. Now, at this point, Michael's face tells it all. I think my fingers are actually, they're shaking. And this is really what we walk around with. Michael, let go of that elastic before it snaps.
Oh,
And
wow. It hurts
yeah,
when you let it go.
we're in litigation because you've been injured with my activity. Okay.
All
But
right.
I
No,
think,
no, you're free. No damages here. Okay.
okay, great. He's good. I want everybody just to recognize that feeling. This exercise was to give you an opportunity to experience when we're overcapacitating, when we're overcapacitated, overcommitted, that feeling that we have where we are feeling like we're about to snap, just like this elastic. So every time we say yes, we stretch our capacity. And when we get to a point where it's like unsustainable anymore, this is where we get into trouble. And so understanding that our capacity has elasticity, we just need to find the right tension is really important. So at times there's probably going to be a little bit of extra tension we can add, but other times we're going to have to release that tension. And that's a lot of saying no, protecting our boundaries, and resigning from things that are just no longer serving us.
The word I like to use, maybe it's not your word, but is it balance? Is that,
Oh.
oh.
I think we all have an interesting relationship with the word balance. We've heard work-life balance for the last decade. I really think it's an elusive term. I think it's something that is really difficult to put our finger on because we're always striving for more. So that balance is constantly being disrupted, and our I guess the way we see balance and our definition is constantly changing and evolving as well because of how we go through life and the different experiences and the different milestones that we reach. So I'm always careful with the word balance, although there is some importance to it.
Okay. I think, Carl, I don't know if there's any questions from anybody in the audience. If we're happy to take them, if anybody has questions of Melanie. If not, you've got another concept, I think, in your toolbox, and you call it, it's got an interesting name, the ego cake. Can you tell us what that is and how that can be a helpful concept to us?
Sure thing. Yeah, you can see it on that screen. And again, this was built out of a state of burnout because I wanted to understand just human psychology and just the cognitive approach to how we commit. So what are our commitment patterns? What are our indulgent behaviors? What does that look like? And how do we deconstruct that? So I love desserts. I have a huge sweet tooth. And it also came out of a conversation with my mom, which I will briefly tell you about. And so ego cake is all about our ego. And the cake piece comes from this story. So my mom says, Mel, your life looks like this decadent dessert table full of mouth-watering desserts. And I was like, wow, yeah, I guess it does. Like I'm pretty, I'm pretty grateful. And she said, and you have taken a bite out of every single one of them. And I thought, uh-oh, I don't like where this is going, but okay, yeah, you're right, I've indulged. And she asked me a question, Michael, that was really difficult to answer. She said, which one have you enjoyed the most? And I couldn't answer her because I had overindulged in all of this opportunity that I wasn't actually satiated. I wasn't actually enjoying the things that I wanted to enjoy. And I thought something is here for me to deconstruct. So let's build a 5-layer cake and really take it layer by layer to understand, what is in or behind our commitment tendencies. So I present to you ego cake. And yeah, and I think this 5-layer cake helps teams and individuals go through, where is it that they may be bogged down? We look at options, we look at all of the opportunity that people and teams are faced with, and we start to evaluate how we're making those decisions. If we go up to distraction, this is a really interesting part because we start to see where is our capacity being eroded? What are we distracted by? Allow me to share a couple quick stats with you. According to the University of California, Irvine, we are distracted every 8 minutes. And what is, more shocking than that is that it can actually take us up to 15 minutes to get back into that zone of genius once we've been ripped out of, where we were into that focus. So once we're distracted, it takes us 15 minutes to get back. 33% of those participating today will wake up in the middle of the night and check their phone. With bosses in our bedrooms, lack of boundaries, distraction is really eroding a lot of our capacity.
I would have thought that it's even more than every 8 minutes or something like that. I keep getting buzzes on my phone all the time. I can get notifications. I could just start picking it up right now, like I suppose, as I feel as I hear buzzing. So it's interesting. Like it sounds to me that's almost conservative, but anyways.
I like that comment because it would be interesting to see the research, during the pandemic, to see if that has actually been impacted. So interesting observation there. Resignation is the middle layer, Michael, and it is the juiciest part of this structure because this is where we actually resign from things that are no longer serving us. So whether that's resigning from a mindset, resigning from a habit, resigning from a committee that might not be serving you anymore, or you just aren't able to commit to, I think is a really powerful tool to create capacity for the thing you really want to do. There's a lot of people who have goals, right? And then we move up in terms of that awareness piece that we talked about, and then learning how to recommit to the things that are aligned with our values, really getting back to that part.
It almost sounds in some ways, when you talked about resignation, it sounds like the inverse of a Nike commercial. Just say no or something. I don't know. Is that really what it just say no without the guilt?
Yeah, I love it. I should reverse the swoop and then put just say no. I think that might be a good marketing tool.
You can have that. That's yours.
Okay, thanks. All right.
We can talk about trademark and intellectual property after the show here. Okay.
Right. Yes. Okay. All right. I have your backing on that.
Thank you.
So this tool is used again individually with coaching, and then when I go into organizations and we do team capacity, there's a whole bunch of exercises and tools that you use at every single layer to really optimize the team's capacity, and we have seen huge results leveraging this type of system.
And the result then is when you're at commitment, I take it, you're doing what you want, which reflects who you are, and not doing all the excess stuff, that's sort of the clutter stuff that gets in the way and burns you out. Is that the theory? Do I have it there? Or?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty good for, just a quick half an hour together so far. You're on it. I think that's great. I think it's also leveraging that assessment tool that allows the team to understand where they're operating out of, make some tweaks and adjustments by deconstructing those commitment habits, and really holding tight that container that allows them to do the things that they need to be doing, that the managers can help their employees directly manage the commitments that they're really responsible for, and not get bogged down by all of the other requests that usually come at teams.
Good. Okay. Carla, do we have any questions, or is the audience just so happy to hear us speak that we're running on here?
We do have questions, and one of them is with respect to the capacity matrix, Melanie, that you spoke of earlier. Can you be in different stages from day to day?
I would say yes, you could. Absolutely. I think it depends on the mindset. I think it depends on the day. I wouldn't personally recommend taking the test every single day. I think the proper cadence could be weekly in the beginning to really track, because once you do understand where you're at, you can make those adjustments, give yourself a bit of time to implement those adjustments, and then retake the assessment to see if you're making any of those improvements. So I guess I would say yes. Because if you are at the mercy of your day, then that will dictate what state you're in. But as soon as you start to control the way that you're responding to the day, you are then in a better place to optimize. This is a great question.
Good. Anything else there, Carla?
We do have a few more questions, but I want to be mindful of time and that we want to spend the last. Yeah. Yes,
I always have to be reminded of time, because everybody says I talk too long. They think lawyers talk too much around here. I don't know where they got that idea. And just so you know, Melanie, in terms of capacity and timing, we at MPEC just last week, we've instituted an hour is no longer an hour. This hour has 50 minutes now. So we're giving people time between meetings, so they're not doing back-to-back meetings. That's another step of progress that we've made. So we do have about 7 minutes left. And where I'd like to go now is maybe you can talk in practical terms as to what kinds of things organizations such as ours can do to support their employees who are facing burnout, if we can go there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I applaud MPAC, because that is one of, working with so many organizations, that is one of the most successful strategies to start with, is to give people that transitional time between meetings. And I think as long as it's respected and there's a hard stop, at that 5-minute mark, or that 10-minute mark for the hour meetings, I think that is really, really wonderful. So congrats to MPAC for implementing this. I would say that there's a lot of things that you can do. One of them, I'll give you an example of one of the organizations that I'm currently working with, is that they've implemented a free-form Fridays. And what that means is that everybody in the organization, as of 2 o'clock on Friday, their calendar is clear. And that means that it gives them space to either finish up some of those tasks that they didn't get to do, plan for the next week so they can go home on the weekend and actually just feel like they're organized for Monday morning and ready to go. And so it's just that boundary setting, and the organization is really, walking the walk and talking the talk. So that's one thing that's been really, really successful. I would say a second one that just makes my heart smile, because a couple of companies have decided to double down and add capacity management to their competency list. And so through the support of the tools and frameworks and coaching, these companies are now poised to be able to have that accountability with every single employee to manage their capacity. This is a huge money-saving exercise as well, because now you have decreased rates of burnout, you have increased rates of retention, you're not spending time and resources on recruiting, retraining, replacing. And so this has been really an exceptional way to help this. I also think, Michael, the third thing would be training the leadership. Training the leadership on how to have conversations about capacity management. This can be a vulnerable conversation that we're not all necessarily equipped to have, but I think knowing the questions to ask, I think being open to those conversations and having strategies ready to help the employee in that time of overwhelm is extremely impactful, and again, increases the overall productivity and bottom line. So
is there a way for leadership to be proactive in that without looking like you're hovering or improperly interfering with the employee's personal state of mind? Is there a way to do that in a delicate way?
Yeah, I think just normalizing, again, the language and the behaviors and the conversation. One company I'm working with right now, they have the monthly meeting check-ins, and what we've incorporated are a couple of questions to check in with capacity management. How is it going? What is taking up most of your capacity? What is weighing you down? What can we be doing differently? So honestly, this is not an overhaul of a system. It is simply a language exercise. I mean, we're not asking managers to be therapists. I think it's just being supportive and using the right language.
Good. And it's funny, and again, I keep talking, you come back to the lawyers and the world I used to work in, and still, but this whole discussion on capacity and speaking up, is this a bit of a culture shift in our society? I've got to tell you, I remember the days when I would sit, I'm going to say this, I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, in partners meetings, and 24/7, 365, clients first, and here's what we did last year and here's what we got to do next year. So you've got that drive and that need to succeed and achieve, and yet we have these issues in terms of balancing achievement and productivity. We have to be mindful of our mental health, and we have to be mindful of our capacity. And are we at a culture shift, and how do we bring all of this together so we can continue to be productive, but also, can I say, not go overboard with it and be mindful?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because, one of the organizations I went into, I had to meet with the CEO before getting approved to come in and work with them. And the biggest obstacle, the biggest concern, biggest pushback was, Mel, are you going to teach our people how to say no, which is going to decrease our productivity? And it was, my answer was absolutely not. What we're going to do is we're going to help people say yes to the right things and no to the things that are just not important. It's not just a prioritization exercise. And I think in addition to that, the culture shift, Gen Z is going to make up, 45% of that workforce by 2035, and they're walking in looking for a company that is going to acknowledge them as a human being, not just as a worker. They're going to look at ways that efforts and progress are rewarded. I mean, I tell you, back in my corporate days when I was working for a tier 1 packaged goods company, I have won awards, and the awards in terms of the nomination verbiage really stated she was the first one to arrive, the last one to leave, she worked weekends, and I thought, oh my God, how horrific is it to stand up and receive an award because I gave up my life essentially for the company? That is not the precedent we want to set. That is the one we want to challenge. So how do we be a supportive company? Look, when people are working on the right things, they are productive naturally. They're more productive naturally. So there's an element of trust in all of this, and normalizing that mental health is something here that we need to address and that we need to reduce the stigma around, and we need to be comfortable having uncomfortable conversations about that. That is just the reality.
Well, that is, I think, just a great place to finish, because we now are at almost 2:50, and I promise not to go beyond, so everybody has that extra 10 minutes. And of course, I still have a few things I've got to say. Most important of which is thank you for joining with us today, because I think we could have kept this discussion going for a long time. I've learned a lot from you. My finger is sore from pulling that elastic band, and I will try to heed your lessons as I go forward in my life. And thank you for sharing with us all the things we can do to prioritize our lives so we can all avoid burnout.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's just been great.